Today's video is of course sponsored by Squarespace. Alright, it's almost Christmas, we've given it enough time for the season to die down now. It's over, 2021 is done. I want to look back and give my driver rankings, basically rating all 20 drivers. Important caveat before we get into this, I'm considering everything. So for example, if a driver's been at a team for a long time or not a very long time, their age, their experience in the sport, I'm just basically going off of my feeling of how impressed I've been by each of those drivers. So you could get someone who's actually driven better than someone else but finishes lower, but if they've got a lot more experience, then that's probably why. I also polled you lot last week asking for your ratings, and I've basically aggregated them out, and I want to see how on average you lot have rated the 20 drivers and compare them to mine at the end. So let's crack on. In P20 of 20, it's obviously Nikita Mazepin. He had a rookie season that was one of the worst rookie seasons I think I've seen in my lifetime watching Formula One. Shocking, destroyed by his teammate. Yes, that Haas was a terrible car, but it wasn't even close between the two of them. It's all well and good being beaten by an experienced teammate, but Mick Schumacher is a rookie too, and it wasn't even that close, which was weird because there wasn't a huge amount between Mazepin and Schumacher in F2, I thought. One race all season, he looked quicker than Schumacher. Silverstone, there might have been a couple more, but that's the one that really sticks in my mind. And in every Q1, Q2, Q3 session of the season, he was beaten. The only times he technically beat Mick was when Mick crashed in FP3 and didn't make qualifying at all. So yes, an absolute shocker from Mazepin. We'll see where he is next year. Hopefully there's more to come. In P19, I'm going to start getting controversial here, but I've gone with Antonio Giovinazzi. The Alfa Romeo driver only scored 3 points all season. Qualifying, decent, but ultimately, qualifying is only so much. If you can't convert in the races, there's no point qualifying well. And a prime example this year, he'd consistently outqualify Kimi, but almost always finish behind him on track. Alfa Romeo had the package to beat Williams in the Constructors, in my opinion, and Antonio didn't play his part for the team to deliver. Yes, there were some shocking strategy calls, I understand, for Antonio, but ultimately, over the course of the whole year, he just didn't do enough. He had opportunities where he qualified well and bottled it. Italy, prime example. I think it was Zandvoort, he qualified well as well and then just fell back through the field. 3 years in the sport as well, 3 years with that same team. You should be kicking on. Ultimately, he didn't do enough to stamp his authority on the sport in his 3-year tenure, in my opinion. Sorry, Jesus. And then in P18, I've gone with the other Alfa Romeo. I've gone with Kimi Räikkönen. Now look, his race pace, much better than Gio's, granted. Qualifying pace, pretty shocking, but ultimately turned it around, scored most of Alfa Romeo's points. But the thing is, you look at how much experience Kimi has. He's the most experienced Formula One driver of all time. And there were significant mistakes that I can't look past. Like Portimao was such a sloppy incident, crashing into your teammate down the straight. And in Austria, where he just drove into Seb. Like, incidents weren't particularly isolated in my mind. They happened more than once. And given the amount of experience he has in the sport, to be making those kind of sloppy mistakes, for me, is deserving of a big downgrade in his points. Granted, his race performances were very good, but I can't look past that, I'm sorry. P17, I've gone with Yuki Tsunoda. Now, again, rookie tax. I think you've got to take that into account. First season in Formula One, I'm always going to be a bit more lenient, but ultimately he was demolished by his teammate, Pierre Gasly. How much was that Pierre driving amazingly? And when you look at it, he had a fantastic first race, Bahrain P9. I was super gassed. I was like, go on, Yuki, you're going to smash it, son. Great end as well, P4 in Abu Dhabi. But in between those two races, not too much to write home about. To be honest, destroyed by Pierre in qualifying, the biggest qualifying gulf of any pair of teammates. Occasionally would showcase that pace that he has, but would make far too many mistakes in the races in qualifying to, spoil delivering on that potential. Binned it at Baku in qualifying, binned it in Imola in qualifying, and then spun in the race in Imola as well. There's countless examples of Yuki cocking up, but there's also a few examples of something being there. Then in P16, it's Nicholas Latifi. Improvement over last year for sure, definitely. Second season in Formula One was better. He was relatively closer to George, which is credit to him because George is different gravy, but still ultimately not near the points often enough. Yes, he capitalised big time on opportunity in Hungary at Spa, credit to him, but other than that, was rarely near the points, not anywhere near as often as George was anyway. A step in the right direction, but not anywhere near big enough a step to merit being higher on this list. And in P15, Mick Schumacher convincingly beat his teammate. You can't really have asked him to do too much more. What I will say, again, rookie, but he probably had the most shunts of anyone this season. Probably him and Tsunoda up there. So he did have a lot of accidents, which, again, it's a rookie. And that Haas is a particularly difficult car. I mean, the ceiling of that Haas is nowhere near the ceiling of that AlphaTauri for sure. Had a few Q2 appearances, which is massively impressive considering the car. And again, Mazepin was absolutely nowhere near getting into Q2 at any stage this season. So credit where credit is due. It's very hard to rate Mick. I can't, with my full chest, put him higher than P15 because there's too many unknowns. But I am hopeful for next season. I do think ultimately he did a pretty good job this year. Christmas is coming up, which also means New Year is coming up. 2022, New Year's resolution. I think a good one is to start your own website, right? Whether you're a creative, whether you just want to write a blog, whether you've got an online business, you can benefit from having your very own personalized website. And Squarespace is the perfect all-in-one platform to do so with all their built-in templates, drag and drop functionality. It is honestly an absolute breeze to make a beautiful looking website. I've been using mine for years. I think you should too. Head to squarespace.com, check out the website. Best thing is you can play around with the functionality of the website builder completely free of charge. It's only when you want to put that website live to the world, when it's nicely finished and complete, that you have to pay anything. And when that time comes, use the discount code TOMMOF1 or give the link in the top line description a tap to get 10% off your first website or domain. P14. Okay, this is the first, I think, big controversial one, but to me, it's Valtteri Bottas. Okay, I'm sorry. I know some of you think I hate him. He's clearly a lovely bloke, all right, obviously. But he's been at that team for 5 years, since 2017, and this head-to-head against Lewis has been his worst season, I think, to date. Look at the stats, they back that up. In a car that fought to the very end for the title, he won one race in 22 and got one P2. Why wasn't he up there? Why wasn't he getting on Max Verstappen's nerves enough this season to help Lewis out? Because look, ultimately, Valtteri's been given a title-winning car to challenge, I think, for his whole tenure at Mercedes. He hasn't grabbed it by the scruff of the neck. And this season, look at how often he just let Verstappen pass. We've seen defences this year. Fernando, Sergio, prime examples. You can defend. Russia, for me, when he just let Max pass, was just ridiculous. We know for a fact Valtteri has pace to match Lewis on his day. He's done it over multiple seasons. He's won numerous races. He's won double-figure races over the course of his career. Yes, he's got plenty of P3s, but surely that's the minimum expectation for someone who's been at a team for 5 years in the best car over this turbo hybrid era. Arguably the best car even this year. Maybe. It's been pretty close. Great drive at Monza. Great drive at Turkey. Fantastic. But then took about 4 people out in Hungary, which, I mean, you look at Grosjean getting a race ban at Spa in 2012, like that could have easily been that. And then the final race of the season, qualifying P6 and then falling down to P8 and not factor into that title battle at all when he should have been up there covering off Max so he couldn't pit for softs. Like, come on. Yes, they won the Constructors' title, but Red Bull have a second driver who it was their first season at the team. So that's, for me, not particularly impressive when they've got that package and Lewis pushed Max as close as he did. I'm sorry. Given the experience he's had at that team, not to mention in the sport, for me, it was nowhere near good enough this year. And then in P13, and I think this is going to be another controversial one, and it hurts because I love him, but I'm saying Daniel Ricciardo. Yes, he got the race win. And granted, fantastic performance, great qualifying, great sprint race, converted in the race, fantastic. In isolation, beautiful, but it's a 22 race season, not a 1 race season. It's easy to forget at the start of the year just how badly, like 10 races in, Lando was completely wiping the floor with Daniel Ricciardo. Daniel Ricciardo, 7-time race winner, 10 years in Formula 1. Lando Norris, 3 years in Formula One. Yes, I know it's a new team. I get that. New facility. I understand that. But a driver of Daniel's experience, a driver who's raced at, Toro Rosso, Red Bull, Renault, now McLaren. Look, I love Daniel. I put him as my, driver of the season prediction, which obviously went completely wrong. He massively disappointed me this year. By the end of the season, his performances were way better, but you can't ignore the start of that season when it was just shocking. And honestly, when you take away that single Monza result, there's very little to get super excited about. Again, especially relative to how well Lando did, not just at the start, but towards the end of the season as well, and got super unlucky, but we'll get into that. So yeah, Daniel, I'm sorry, I truly am, but P13, it is better next year. Please, mate, please. On to P12, and a driver who I think went super under the radar this year, who had the definition of what I'd call a solid season. Nothing amazing, nothing terrible, just solid. I'm saying Lance Stroll. Did he reach the heights of his teammate Sebastian Vettel? No. But did he reach the lows that sometimes Seb struggled with? I don't think he did. I think Lance actually sat at a pretty good level. He got 1 P6, 1 P7, 4 P8s, 1 P9 and 2 P10s, which is pretty consistent considering 7th best car this year, I think. That's pretty clear. But you got to remember as well, this was Lance's 5th year in Formula One, and he's been at that team for a while now as well. You would expect him to kick on. Again, I don't think Lance has got the ceiling of these other young drivers. I've said that before, I'll say it again. I don't think he's going to be a top tier Formula One driver. I could be wrong, but I just don't see it happening. And then in P11, I'm putting his teammate, Sebastian Vettel. This was a tricky one, okay? Because obviously he's a 4-time world champion, so standards should be very high for Seb. But his 2020 at Ferrari was objectively shocking. Like, we can all agree on that. Going into this year, I didn't have too much confidence in Seb. I wasn't sure what kind of Sebastian we were going to be getting. But tell you what, considering the calibre of that car, where it is this year, it's mad that was like the 3rd best car last year. Yet he still managed those 2 P2s, one that was cruelly taken away, of course, and that P5 in Monaco. Yes, his lows were, his first 4 races were all pretty shocking. It was sloppy at times. Again, the Silverstone spin, that wasn't great. But new team, once he got used to it, once he got dialed in with that car, his highs were much higher than Lance's. And I think that's a really positive, good sign moving forward for Aston Martin into next year. New technical regulations. If they can give Seb a car that he is happy in and feels comfortable in and enjoys, could we be seeing an old Sebastian Vettel? Maybe. I would not be surprised. He's clearly still capable of delivering absolute top tier results on his day. So well done, Seb. I would have put you 1 position higher than this, but the next driver pulled out a worldie right at the end. Because P10, I've put Sergio Perez, which difficult one because he was destroyed by Max, and you've got to always compare drivers to their teammates. And in terms of teammate golf, in terms of quali pace particularly, but also race pace, it wasn't that close between the two of them. But it can't be a coincidence that the last 3 teammates of Max Verstappen since Daniel Ricciardo have been a country mile off in terms of qualifying pace and pretty far off in terms of race as well, which is of course a combination, in my opinion, of Max being just on an insane level, but also that car development being built and focused towards Max Verstappen's quite nose-pointy driving style. I think that's fair to say. It's going to be nigh on impossible in this current form of Formula One anyway, for a driver to jump in and be anywhere near Max as far as I'm concerned. Did Sergio do a better job than Alex, than Pierre did? For sure. Not so much in quali, though. His average quali was like 6.5, which is almost the same as Gasly and Leclerc in AlphaTauri and a Ferrari. But you could tell as the season progressed, Sergio began to gain confidence in that car, in that package underneath him. Look at the last 7 races, right? 5 of them probably should have been P3 finishes. 3 of them were. Brazil and Qatar, he had to settle for P4, mainly because of VSCs. Saudi Arabia, he got caught up in a pinch with Leclerc, which wasn't really anyone's fault. And then Abu Dhabi, he put on the defensive performance of a bloody lion. Given the context that this was his first season at Red Bull, at that cursed second seat, the fact he came so close to Bottas, he was 35 points behind Bottas, and that was with no point scoring in the last 2 races. And he basically threw Abu Dhabi. For me, that is more impressive than Valtteri, even though Valtteri finished ahead of him in points. He was in the right place to capitalise in Baku and get that P1. He picked up plenty of P3s over the course of the year as well. I'll tell you what, I think Sergio Verstappen next year is going to be a decent little pairing. In P9, we have race winner Esteban Ocon. You know I love Esteban. You know he's my guy. P9 I think is fair though. Look, his season was generally pretty good. Again, high points. Got that win at Hungary. Almost got on the podium at Saudi Arabia as well. His point scoring finishes over the course of the year were pretty consistent. He had that purple patch. Was it a cracked chassis? We'll never know how much performance he actually lost through that. It's impossible to say. But again, great point scoring finishing considering that Alpine was probably the 6th quickest car over the course of the year. Now, of course, he was beaten by his teammate who hadn't raced in Formula 1 for the last 2 years, jumped into that seat. Yes, I know it's Fernando Alonso. Yes, I know he's a machine, but that is still a downgrade on Ocon. It has to be. I think he would have expected to beat Alonso this year. I expected him to beat Alonso this year. So, if anything, in that regard, he has slightly undelivered on my expectation, but Alonso has driven at a very, very good level. Ultimately, that Alpine pairing have been fantastic, but for me, Ocon is going to sit P9. And then in P8, this is going to shock a lot of you British Bias Brigade, I know. I'm putting George Russell. I think I just heard Aldas's head blow off, actually. Did he finish in P2 in Belgium? Yes. Did he qualify P3 in Russia? Yes. Fantastic performances in that Williams, which isn't as much of a dog as it's been in previous seasons, but it's still probably 9th quickest car. Definitely better than the Haas, but I don't think as good as the Alfa Romeo. Now, in those 2 races where George did exceptionally well, did Nicholas also do well in those races? He did, which, tells you that, okay, that Williams package clearly worked very well in those races. I mean, of course they did. But I have very, very high standards set of George. And did he eclipse them this year? Again, very firmly on top of Nicholas in qualifying. More at fault for the shunt with Bottas at Imola? I think so. It wasn't a perfect year, and I feel like, especially after his Mercedes contract was announced, the performances kind of started to drop off. Although, again, that was a struggle that both drivers had. Because, again, I'm going on this list based off how impressed I've been with drivers. And George has had isolated periods of being super impressive. But over the course of the whole season, he's been really good. But I can't put him higher than 7 other people, basically. That's just the way I see it. And then P7, we have El Blan, Fernando Alonso, of course, fantastic. Blew my expectations completely out of the water. Okay, we've already established that. Back in Enstone, the team he won his 2 world championships with 40 years of age, 2 years out of the sport. Outscored his younger and more experienced in that team teammate, put in an absolute stellar defence to help Esteban get that P1 in Hungary and had his own P3 at Qatar. And like with Esteban, all this in probably the 6th best car of the year. Why isn't he higher? Well, it did take a bit of time for him to get going. He is a 2-time world champion. Ultimately, he has the next most experience in Formula 1 after Kimi Räikkönen. So the standards should be higher. I completely underestimated those standards going into this year. Fernando had a very, very good year. And again, I think P7 is very fair. Yes, he beat Ocon, but he definitely didn't walk all over him. In terms of qualifying gap, average race gap, it was like the closest of any teammate pairing of any team. On to P6, and again, I think this is going to upset a few people, but you're going to have to deal with it. I'm putting Charles Leclerc P6, which is still very good, but not maybe as high as you might think. And it's one of them that I actually think he did better in 2021 than his teammate. But it's the additional context and caveats around it that mean he's actually finishing behind his teammate in this list. Charles had a fantastic season. Super unlucky at Monaco not to start the race from pole. Both Ferraris had shocking pace in France, got taken out by Stroll in Hungary, and made a really unfortunate strategy call that also Lando did in Russia to lose out massively. Other than those 4 results, he was in the points every single race in 2021, had that insane P2 drive at Silverstone that could have been a P1 if Lewis had maybe gotten a drive-through penalty, which maybe would have been a better penalty. Maybe 6 P4s over the course of the season and 2 pole positions in, again, Monaco and Baku. The thing is, though, this is Charles's 4th season in the sport. It's his 3rd season at Ferrari. I set incredibly high standards of Charles because I honestly think he's the next best thing after Max and Lewis. I really do. I know Charles was unlucky at times, but also he did have some shocking results. I mean, in France, yes, they both had a shocker, the Ferraris, but Carlos finished 11th, he finished 16th. In Monaco, yes, it was unlucky. They couldn't fix the car, but also Charles was the one who crashed to cause the damage in the first place. And then look at Austria, where he just drifted into Gasly and popped his tyre and ended his race. When Charles is on it, there's very few drivers who can hang with him, right? Over the course of the year, he was very, very good performance-wise, but he was outscored by his teammate. And yes, it wasn't by much, but I think that goes to show how Charles's season, there was a lot of what could have been. And again, as much as purely driving performance, I think he did better than Carlos. I was more impressed by Carlos's year than I was Charles. So sorry, mate, you're going to have to settle for P6. And then for P5, I've gone with Pierre Gasly. I do think over the course of the 22 race season, that AlphaTauri was probably the 5th best car, with Pierre delivering very close to the ceiling very regularly and Yuki Tsunoda not. I mean, Pierre's average qualifying position was exactly the same as Charles Leclerc's. 16 out of 22 races he qualified in the top 6, which is crazy. On average, did he fall back in the races? Yes, he did. Granted, not by much though. But again, when you consider his qualifying performances, we're putting him in amongst or ahead of the Ferraris, the McLarens, even sometimes Sergio Perez. I mean, fair enough. Like, I don't think the AlphaTauri hardly ever had the race pace to hang with those teams. Now, did he cock up himself in Bahrain in the Monza sprint, losing his front wing? Yes, he did. Granted, again, didn't have a perfect season, made mistakes. But also AlphaTauri didn't exactly nail the strategy every week. I mean, Russia is a prime example of that. Look, in my opinion, Pierre was unreal last season. 2021 only built on that stock that he'd already established after 2020. For sure, I think P5 is very fair. I think he had a fantastic season. And then in P4, it's Carlos bloody Sainz. Carlos looked very, very good in that McLaren last year. It was announced he was moving to Ferrari. At the time, it was a bit of a like, oh, is that the right call? Because Ferrari had a bad 2020, McLaren had a very good 2020, but he's just smashed it, hasn't he? He's jumped into that car, which his predecessor, Sebastian Vettel, really struggled with, alongside Charles, and held his own 100%. 4 podiums in his debut season. That's 3 more than Charles managed. The same number as Lando, actually. And ultimately finished P5 ahead of both of them. If we want to talk about consistency, Carlos finished every single race of the season. Only 2 times was he outside of the points, and they were both P11s. So only 2 places higher over those 2 races, and his point scoring in every single race of the entire year in his debut season at Ferrari. That is so impressive. I don't think we can play down how much goes into joining a new team, a completely new environment, race engineer, a brand new car to get used to, a new way of living, a new country you're going to be living in probably as well. Like, there's so much that changes in your life when you go into a new team to get settled before you can even think about driving quickly. I've already told you that I think Ferrari are going to be the team to beat in 2021. And I still think Charles is the more likely driver to deliver a World Drivers' Championship. But I tell you what, I think Carlos will run him close, because this year he did not settle for that number 2 slot that I think everyone thought he was going in there to fill. Not at all. Okay, top 3 time. And in P3, I've gone with Lewis Hamilton in P3. Look, if you don't like it, you're going to have to find a way to deal with it, okay? You could just look into your heart and find a way of dealing with it, okay? I'm sorry. Lewis had some significant wobbles in 2021 that we haven't been accustomed to seeing statistically the greatest of all time making. I think that's very fair to say. Monaco, a real struggle from a him but also a team point of view. I acknowledge the team element in that result for sure. Baku, look, it's a mistake. He pressed the button that he shouldn't have pressed and the car went straight on. He should have won that race and he made a mistake. Who was more at fault for the Silverstone incident? I think Lewis was. He didn't make the apex and got super lucky, not just to not DNF himself, because that's a super high speed crash, and the fact that Lewis's front suspension didn't disintegrate is an absolute miracle, but also went on to win the race. And he got super lucky in Imola, having that off going through traffic, and was saved by the red flag from Valtteri and George crashing, otherwise he'd have been a lap down. Again, these are mistakes that we've not been used to seeing from Lewis Hamilton. Now, of course. Second half of the season, particularly unreal. Different gravy. Absolutely delivered when he needed to. Pulled out some incredible performances in that Mercedes. No question. It was almost enough to win the whole thing. Because we know, everyone knows that he should have won that race in Abu Dhabi. He kept himself in the title fight. But over the course of the 22 races, with a big dose of luck and fortune that was only bestowed on Max at the very end in the final race. Third best driver of the year is not a low score, okay? Lewis drove fantastically over the course of the entire season, but there are two drivers who I thought had better 2021s than Lewis. So P2 for me is Lando Norris. Again, I know it's going to be controversial. Let me explain myself. First of all, first 10 races of the season, okay? So pretty much the first half of the season, best driver on the grid, even clear of Max as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely ridiculous standard he kept up in those first 10 races of the year. Then we go to Hungary. He gets punted by Bottas, okay? He's out of the race, no fault of his own. What can he do? Nothing. Then we're in Belgium for that race where, of course, he dropped it going up through Radio Rouge, and he shouldn't have been allowed to go up through there. It was dangerous. Red flag conditions 100%. It took him crashing for the session to actually be stopped. You know, he had the pace. If anything, he was up there to qualify P1, really. Russia is, of course, the one that got away. And for me, that is the biggest thing that Lando's done wrong this season. Poor strategy call from himself. But I look at that and I still think the team should have done more to guide Lando in that instance. But his inexperience did shine through with his reaction. He was clearly very emotional on the radio. But can you begrudge him? Like, he's literally going into the last few laps leading that race. Can you blame him for being a bit emotional? You can't. And other than them, he's in the points every single race. Yes, the end of the season did drop, but you got to remember Ferrari got their new hybrid unit, which I think was an extra like 40 kilowatts of energy, and you could see the Ferrari's relative pace jumped up pretty significantly after that. But also Lando had like 3 tyre issues, punctures. He had that one in Brazil, which with Carlos, that was pretty unlucky. I mean, there's been way bigger contacts throughout the course of the season that's had no puncture, but Lando got one. He got one in Qatar as well, and he got a slow puncture in Abu Dhabi. So it's just like he still managed to finish in the points in all of those races. You got to think what could have been. And then to do all that and upstage your 7-time race winner, over 10 years of experience in Formula One teammate, Daniel Ricciardo, who most people, myself included, expected to come in and steal that crown off of Lando and assert their dominance in that team. No, like Lando stepped up in a huge way this year. He had an unreal season. He got super unlucky towards the end of it. Over the course of the year, he thoroughly impressed me. Didn't make the same number of mistakes as Lewis did as far as I'm concerned, not the same calibre of mistakes. And for me, he's P2. And then on to P1, obviously it is Maximilian Verstappen. What a season by the man. P1 or 2 in every single race that didn't have an incident. The only blemishes were, of course, Baku, where his tyre blew out, completely out of his control. Silverstone, where, again, I think Lewis was more at fault for that crash. Hungary, where he got wiped out by Bottas. And Italy, where I know he ends up on top of Lewis's car. For me, it was a pretty 50-50 one. I thought there was enough space that he found there to be, but it was late. So I can see it from both sides. Did Max, over the course of the season, push the limits in terms of pushing drivers off? Or should I say pushing Lewis off? Yes, I do think he did. But look, ultimately, Max was driving to the whistle. He was rarely punished for these things, so of course he's going to carry on doing it because it's helping him out. For me, not liking the way that Max was overly aggressive in pushing someone off, I don't really put the fault of that to the driver. I put the fault of that to the rule makers who are not punishing them. I mean, for Brazil, for example, is clear as day. Brazil's clearly a penalty. He's pushed him into the next bloody continent. But they didn't even penalise it, which is mad. And it's like, well, if they're not going to penalise that, then you can't blame Max for carrying on doing it. Like, you just can't. I didn't like the fact that when Lewis was behind him, he did tread on the brakes, 69 bar of pressure, whatever it was. I can just picture being in the cockpit and thinking, why aren't you going past? Like, I'm slowing down. Right, I'm going to slow down more. That's the way I see it. I don't think it was any more malicious than that. I don't think it's a Schumacher Villeneuve or a Schumacher Hill, for example. And yes, Max got super lucky in the final race. But again, I think over the course of the year, he drove the best clear of anyone else. And I think he deserved a bit of luck at the end. Did he deserve to win the final race? No. Did he deserve to win the championship? I think he did. Incredible performance from Max Verstappen, his first world title, first of many, I'm sure. I know it came in very bitter, understandably. Like, if the shoe was on the other foot, I think Max would be absolutely livid, and rightly so, because the FIA are an absolute shambles. But there you go. So there's my 20 in order. Before you flame me too hard in the comments, you put your money where your mouth is. Like I said at the start of the video, I polled you lot earlier. I asked you this. Based on how impressed you've been by their overall performance across this 22 race Formula 1 season, please rate all 20 drivers from 1 to 10. 8,453 of you did, so thank you. And here is your top 20. Now, Lance Stroll P19. That for me is pretty shocking. Very surprised by that one. 4.86 out of 10 you lot rated him on average. To be fair, the only other one that really surprised me on this is Charles Leclerc being as low as he is, P8. And actually, look, 7.18. He's much closer to Sergio Perez. He's only 0.02 of a place off of Perez on average, compared to, Russell's like 0.4 ahead of him. So that to me was super surprising. I think Charles, as much as, yes, he was beaten on points by Carlos, I think Charles still had a very, very good season. He was super unlucky at times, and I think that's kind of been held against him as bad performances here. I really don't think Charles was the 8th best driver this year. I felt bad putting him 6th, but there you go. And look, Verstappen clear, 9.54 average rating, with Lewis 8.96. So Lewis closer to Sainz than he was to Max for sure, which I think is fair. But there we have it. We are done. I think this is going to be my last video before the end of the year. I'm going to do a Christmas podcast with Hannah like we did last year, so keep your eyes out for that. But I think we're done for 2021. What a year it's been. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming along. Thank you to Squarespace for their continued support this year. It's been incredible. It helps me do what I do, as do you. You help me do what I do. Thank you honestly so much for all the support this year. It's been amazing. 2022 is going to be even bigger, even better. I promise you that. For the final time in 21, my name's Tommo. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.